Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to EHS for our Sunday program. My name is Chak. I'll be the moderator for the program today. Because of COVID, we essentially stopped our in-person talks. Obviously, all of this is virtual now. We hope to get back to in-person gatherings and talks when the time is correct, at the right time. So let me talk a little bit about EHS with a brief quote about humanism. Humanism is an approach to life based on reason and our common humanity, recognizing that moral values are properly founded on human nature and experience alone. Of course, we can expand that to go beyond humans and talk about all life on Earth, but that's a topic for another day. So today we have a great program. The speaker is going to be Dan Appelquist, and the title of the talk is "This is for Everyone: Ethical Principles for Building the Web." A pretty timely topic, especially during these days, with everything that's going on out there. Let me start with a brief overview about Dan. Dan Appelquist is a web technologist working at Samsung, where he leads the web advocacy team that works with developers and participates in international standardization efforts. Excuse me. He's been working on the web since there has been a web. Interesting, must be early 90s. He lives in London, England. So he's actually, I think at this time, holds the record for the furthest speaker at EHS. He's a dual citizen of both the US as well as the UK and counts himself as a world citizen. As you can imagine, I think most of you know the name Appelquist. So Dan is our Sharon's nephew, I think. Hopefully I got that right. So the talk itself is, I'll describe it briefly. In effect, as with all communication problems, the World Wide Web offers both advantages and risks. At its best, it benefits society and causes no harm, encouraging free expression while maintaining user privacy and security. But can these ethics be encoded into the structure of the web? In this talk, Dan will talk about his group's efforts to develop ethical principles for the web. He will talk about their ideals that guide them, as well as how the internet can be made to be pro-social and open to all people regardless of geo-boundaries. He will discuss how the web should support healthy debate and freedom of expression, utilizing verifiable data, and he will also explain how the architecture of the web should be transparent, environmentally sustainable, and above all, user-friendly. So I think it's a pretty timely topic. I expect we'll have a very healthy Q&A at the end. So with that, let me turn it over to Dan. Dan, welcome to EHS.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I really appreciate the invite and the opportunity to come speak to you. So, as mentioned, this talk is called This is for Everyone: Ethical Principles for Building the Web. Just a bit more detail on an intro to me. I had the developer advocacy group for Samsung Internet. Samsung Internet is the web browser that Samsung produces for Android devices. And so I do a lot of work with not only working with developers and advocating what we call doing developer advocacy with the web developer community, but also with web standards organizations, and in particular with the World Wide Web Consortium, or what we call, or what we shorten to W3C. So W3C is one of those acronyms, and this talk might have quite a few acronyms in it. I've tried to acronymize it as much as possible. But in particular, within W3C, which is the group that was started by Tim Berners-Lee to develop standards for the World Wide Web, there is a group called the Technical Architecture Group, and I co-chair that group, which is a position that I was privileged to be appointed to by Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that group does in a second. But I also have been involved since moving to the UK in 1999 from the US. I have been involved in some work of the UK Government Digital Service, or GDS, and in particular, I'm a member of the UK Government Open Standards Board, which is a board that oversees the application and the use of open standards within the UK government. I'm an immigrant to the UK, as I mentioned, and I'm also dual national. And I think most importantly for the context of this talk, I am a human being living on this planet. And I have a stake in what I consider to be one of the most important recent technology developments of the human race, which is the World Wide Web. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So first of all, I hesitated whether to put this slide in, but I really wanted to kind of define what ethics means from the perspective of this talk. So what am I talking about when I talk about ethics in the context of web ethics? And really, I'm talking about applied ethics, the ability to apply ethical thinking to specific disciplines, or encoding moral values into rules that guide our conduct. And one of the, I think, earliest examples of that is often talked about when we talk about different kinds of ethical or professional ethical principles is the Hippocratic Oath, which is often summarized as do no harm. It's a very good example, I think, of ethical principles that are applied to a particular discipline or profession. But I think it's important to understand that it's not only do no harm. There are also things in the Hippocratic Oath, such as I will use treatment to help sick according to my ability and judgment. I will never, but never with a view to injury and wrongdoing. So that's the do no harm bit. But I will also, I will not abuse the bodies of men or women, bond or free. So that's an interesting, again, ethical principle. And whoever, whatsoever I shall see or hear in the course of my profession, I will never divulge, holding such things to be holy secrets. I think that is particularly interesting. So professional confidentiality being kind of built into this. I think it was quite, when I was doing the research on this, I was really fascinated to see how much more to it there was in this kind of like, very facile kind of do no harm thing. So how can we apply ethics to technology? And that's something that I started to think about, really put effort into, I would say, a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and in particular thinking about how we can apply it to the web. So one very early idea about how ethics could be applied to technology comes actually from science fiction, from Isaac Asimov, who in 1942 wrote these amazing 3 laws of robotics, which he then reused again and again in a lot of his famous works of fiction. But he envisioned that as robotics grew and as robotics became part of human society, that we would need ethical principles by which these robots would behave. And famously, a robot may not injure a human being, or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given to it by humans, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So there was no real detail in Isaac Asimov's work about how these laws were encoded, because Isaac Asimov wasn't thinking about robots in terms of real computing systems. He was kind of thinking about he was thinking about it more in terms of that robots would be something like an electronic brain. Um, we so, but what is interesting is that these laws were intended to be in his works of fiction. These laws were intended to be kind of built into robots themselves. So it would be impossible. It would be a fail-safe mechanism that would make it impossible for a robot to harm a human being. And a lot of Isaac Asimov's fiction was actually built around unintended consequences of these laws. And the fact that robots therefore had behavior which was strange or difficult to understand, but again could be traced back to these laws. It's quite interesting stuff. I actually had the privilege of meeting Isaac Asimov one time when I was a teenager, so I'm really glad to have done that. More modern examples of tech ethics or technology ethics. The Association for Computing Machinery, which is kind of a trade or a trade association or a professional association of computer scientists and electronic engineers and that kind of thing, wrote their own ethical principles for to guide their members' activity. And it's interesting again an interesting read. I've included links in here if you're interested in, and I can certainly paste those links into the chat later. So ACM defined their code of ethics as being, contributing that the works of technologists, the works of computer scientists, needed to contribute to society and to human well-being, and that we should be avoiding harm, and interestingly, respecting privacy. Respecting privacy comes up again and again in the discussion around how we apply ethics to technology, because it turns out that when you introduce computing devices into almost every aspect of human existence, as we have, that the issues around privacy and data come to the fore. Google AI Group also produced some interesting work around technology ethics, and this came out of an interesting series of events. So some employees in Google got wind of the fact that Google had some kind of contract with the military to develop artificial intelligence for weapons or for technologies that were related to weapons, and there was a kind of a staff revolt in Google. This is all kind of written up in various places. But what ended up happening was this led to the creation of some Google AI ethical principles, which have guided their work since then. And this has gone back and forth. It's certainly not cut and dry that everything is okay now, but I think in general this was certainly a very good development, and it highlighted the fact that ethics in technology don't need to come from top down. They don't need to come from the management of an organization or from the leaders of an organization. It can come bottom up. It can come from the people that are involved in an organization can demand that there be a greater emphasis on ethics. Another organization which has ethical roots is Mozilla, which is the organization and company that develops the Firefox browser. And I think it was last year or the year before, they released an update to their Mozilla manifesto, which also kind of demonstrates how an organization can take not only can take kind of principles seriously, but can put them at the root of the work that they do. So this kind of manifesto statement guides the work of that organization, and they're aiming towards the web, which is the platform that Mozilla is participating in building should, for instance, provide a platform for civil discourse, human dignity, and individual expression, and that security and privacy on the internet are fundamental. So privacy is one thing that came up again and again as I was taking a look at some of the prior art with regard to ethical principles in technology. So now I want to go back a little bit in time to the mid 90s, early 90s, mid 90s, to the dawn of the web. And for those of you who, before I do that, I kind of wanted to do one thing, which was to talk about what differentiates the web from the internet. What is the web, right? And how does it differ from the internet? And I think this is a topic that comes up again and again. Even technologists use these terms interchangeably. We often use them anecdotally when we're talking in a conversation. We'll use the terms web and internet interchangeably. In fact, from a perspective of technologists, and kind of from the perspective of this talk, I kind of wanted to draw a distinction so that we know what we're talking about here. I stole this image, but I think it's quite a good example or a good image to help get people thinking about what differentiates the internet from the web. To put it kind of like in basic form, the internet is the wires, and the web is anything that you really, from the perspective of this talk, what you use when you're using a browser. And that's really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about using the web, is what you use when you use a browser. When you use a web browser like Firefox or Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge, Samsung Internet, you're using the web. And the web in that sense is an application development and delivery platform, which started as a document sharing system, but has since become this kind of global application delivery platform. So going back in time to the dawn of the web, and tracing its origins, one really important document when it comes to the beginning of the web is this 1993 paper or letter from CERN, which is a European nuclear research and accelerator lab where Tim Berners-Lee was working at the time that he developed the first web browser and the first web server. And he developed them as a way for scientists to exchange information more easily, to be able to publish papers and read each other's papers and that kind of thing. At the time, it wasn't exactly, there were a number of other platforms that people were building on top of the internet, which already existed at this point, to more easily exchange information. So Gopher was another platform, which people may remember. There was also FTP, which was very commonly used to transfer information across the internet. And there were other systems that people were building and envisioning. But one of the things that differentiated the web was the fact that CERN decided to put the code into the public domain. And that made the web catch fire, as it were, because now with the code and the ideas in the public domain and with the organization that had developed it, or within which it had been developed, kind of relinquishing control over it, it was free to be picked up and used worldwide. So that in and of itself was a statement of ethical principle. The idea that this code, that this original version of the web should be made available to anybody. And it was echoed in 2012. If you're not if you watch the opening ceremonies from the 2012 Olympics, which was held in London, you might remember a very brief image, this image, which is where Tim Berners-Lee, who again was the inventor of the web originally, actually appears on stage in the middle of this enormous Olympic arena, and he live tweeted, "This is for everyone," and that message was displayed over the back of the arena. I think every kind of web technologist who was watching went crazy. I kind of did myself. I was yelling and screaming to my family, and they were like, "What the heck are you talking about?" But it was something that the director of this 2012 Olympic opening ceremony, Danny Boyle, was very keen to put in because it was also highlighting all kinds of British innovation. And of course, Tim Berners-Lee, even though the work was done in Switzerland, Tim Berners-Lee is a British person. So it was part of that kind of highlighting innovation. So I guess what I'm saying is the web already encodes ethics. It was born to be a more ethical environment. But what makes the web, what differentiates the web, what makes it webby? It's open, and I'll talk a little bit about what open means. It's linkable. So one of the key features of the web is the ability to link back and forth between different websites. And I think the innovation of putting together the hyperlink and hypertext, which was a very weird concept in the early 90s, but with the power of and reach of the internet was really the innovation of the web. So linkability is a key element. It's secure and private. It's internationalized. It's accessible. It doesn't require a single authentication method or identity, so it's inherently federated. It's and inherently international and global in scope. It's easy to use. Again, coming back to the point and click interface. It's also easy to make a website. It's easy to publish information, relatively easy to publish information on the web. And that was, again, a design principle. And when it's at its best, it enables big web. So companies like Facebook, for instance, and Twitter and Google and big publishing companies and Amazon and all these people, all these big companies can make use of the web. But also it enables small web. It enables the barbershop that I go to publish a very simple web application that allows me to book a haircut with the barber that I want and get a message and that my appointment has been confirmed, and then that provides them value, provides me value. It doesn't have to be any bigger than that in order to provide an enormous amount of value to the people who are involved in that conversation. It can be the place where you look up information about a job. It can be the place where you look up information about benefits. It can be in fact, the web, when it's at its best, enables people in every kind of situation in their life, from birth to death. And I wanted to drill down into open a little bit. What makes the web open? The web is built on open standards. So what is an open standard? Open standards are things that are built by not one particular company. They are built in a transparent, multi-stakeholder approach. So organizations like the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, or ECMA International, which is where JavaScript is standardized, or other organizations such as WG, which is another web standards organization, are multi-stakeholder and open and transparent by design, meaning you can trace the decision-making process. You can see exactly where an idea came from, who proposed it, who discussed it. You can go back and look at all of the minutes of all of the meetings. They're all public. And you can trace the process of any standard that passes kind of through this kind of process. Um, the standards themselves are also released fair access. So what does that mean? It means that you can download and read the standards without having to pay any fee, which is extremely important when you're talking about an open platform like the web. And that's not universally true for open standards that are produced in other disciplines, where often you do have to pay a fee even to download and read the standard. And these standards are produced under royalty-free licensing. That means that the companies that are involved in these multi-stakeholder discussions have agreed ahead of time to contribute any patents that they have which are applicable to the standard into not into the public domain, but that they've agreed to license those patents royalty free to anybody implementing the standard. So that creates a level playing field, and it means that more people are able to develop web technology, to use web technology without having, and to develop browsers, for instance, without having to worry about having to pay license fees for the use of IPR or patents. And that leads to multiple implementations, interoperable implementations. Keep the web honest because it means that you have more user choice. Users can choose a browser that they like better. That drives innovation and keeps the web more delivering for the end user as opposed to the companies that are involved. The web also, one of the has at its core, or it's at the core of its design thinking. And when I use the word design, I'm talking about technical design rather than visual design. So I'm talking more about the technical architecture of the web. At the core of the technical architecture of the web is something called the priority of constituencies, where and this is encoded into a design principles document, which is one of the documents that my group produces. And just a quote from that, this actually came from something, another document earlier called the HTML design principles, so it has been something that has been a kind of at the core of W3C's work and their ethos. User needs coming before the needs of web page authors, so web developers, which come before the needs of user agent implementers, so the people that build web browsers, which come before the needs of specification writers, the people that are writing these web standards, and which in turn comes before theoretical purity, theoretical computer science purity, which is very often held up by computer scientists as being, well, you have to do it this way because of this principle. Well, actually, the user needs come before that. So that idea of putting user needs first is also kind of a key ethical underpinning of the web. Some examples of how that translates into real world. Accessibility, something that we sometimes shorten as A11Y because accessibility is a very long word. So just to quote Tim Berners-Lee, the power of the web is its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. And that comes through in a lot of the work that happens in the web standards world and in the World Wide Web Consortium in particular. We're always looking at things from a perspective of, is this accessible? Is this going to promote accessibility to the disabled? Technologies such as accessibility for rich web applications or ARIA, or other new technologies that are coming at us to kind of that are being developed right now to support emerging web applications such as accessibility object model, are all things that are based on the idea that we need to make sure that the web continues to be accessible. Internationalization is also extremely important for the web. So we need to make sure that that the web works for different writing systems, for languages, for cultures, for right-to-left writing systems, for all kinds of standardized character sets that are, again, standardized in another group, which is called Unicode. So you probably haven't heard of Unicode, but I guarantee you've been using emojis, and the reason that emojis are so popular and so well used is because they are a standard. So that means that if you have a Samsung device and you have another device by Apple or by whoever, Motorola, you can know that if I send somebody an emoji, or if I use an emoji or any kind of Unicode character in my web application, that the other person is going to see something similar. They're going to see the same character. So again, that is another application of kind of open standards and international standards. We also have spent a lot of time encoding security and privacy into the web. So in particular, there was some work that I was involved in 2014, which came out of the Snowden revelations about pervasive monitoring of web activities. And that was a wake-up call to a lot of web technologists. And you can see about 100 of these people in a room that gathered in a workshop that I hosted in 2014, which was the point of this workshop was to really think about how we can improve the web to make it more naturally resistant to pervasive monitoring by governments, and also to other activities such as malicious Wi-Fi hotspots that were getting a bad reputation for harvesting data or maliciously inserting advertisements into people's web pages as they were trying to surf the web. So one of the things that came out of that was the moving the web to a more secure web. Before then, and I mean this was already happening, but before then, a lot of people thought, well, we don't really need to have secure web, HTTPS web, except for things like banking and payments and stuff like that. And I think what the realization that a lot of people had at this time when we were looking at these revelations around how governments were harvesting the data about web usage was that what article you look at in the New York Times or what page you look at on Wikipedia or what forum you contribute to, or what you like on Facebook, can, depending on where you live, be, put you in prison or end up with you being tortured. And that is one of the things that we sought to try and fix by adding more layers of encryption into the web, not at a policy level, but at a technology level. And this is an old graph from last year, but already you can see as of last year, as of 2019, we were headed towards a web where most of the web is now encrypted by default, HTTPS, and you can have a lot greater feeling that as a web user that the web has your back, that the web is protecting you from at least those threats. I won't talk about this very much, except to say that this also led to us in the tag, where we review new work that is proposed to be added to the web, or new technologies that are proposed to be added to the web. It led us to develop something called the Security or Privacy and Security Questionnaire, which helps other technologists think about how should I think about privacy and security, and how should I incorporate privacy and security thinking into the work that I'm doing. But we have to go beyond this. And that's why a couple of years ago, started work with Hadley Beeman, who is another member of the technical architecture group, on a document called the TAG Ethical Web Principles. And one of the things that we did, or that we thought about when we started this, was that we all had these ideas of how the web was fundamentally a more ethical platform, but There was a lot of oral history to it, and there was a lot of just people saying, "Oh yeah, the web has a very strong culture of accessibility or a very strong culture of security and privacy," but it wasn't really written down anywhere that no, this is a design principle that we have. It's a fundamental architectural principle, and it's something that when new technologies are being added to the web, we should be considering these issues. So we started to think about how could we write this down in a little bit more of a codified way. And one of the first things we came up with is that the web should not cause harm to society. So coming back to the do no harm, what we clearly see that the web, when it is misused, can cause harm to society through things like filter bubbles, through malicious advertisements, clickbait, fake news, encouraging addictive behaviors. So, as we develop new technologies to the web and as we enhance the web, can we be thinking about ways that we can push back against those behaviors? Can we make the web inherently more difficult, a platform to be misused in those ways? I guess that is the thinking. The web must support healthy community and debate, but also healthy community and debate can lead to harassment. It can lead to algorithms that prioritize engagement over meaningful discussion. It can and it can also, but it can also have positive developments, such as things like content warnings, which enable people to, when they're sharing information, to be able to signpost this might trigger you. This is so again, this is the kind of thing that we're hoping to that people will be developing as they and thinking about these principles as they develop these new technologies. And one thing that we certainly think, and that we're trying to build into the kind of fabric of our discussion here and our design thinking, is that the web should prioritize the needs of the marginalized over the comfort of the privileged. And that's something that I think we should all be thinking about in the technology sphere. It's very easy for technologists to get into who are sitting in their plush offices with big monitors, to get into a kind of like groupthink that minimizes the needs of people who are on the margins of society. And rather than doing that, we really need to think about, how does this benefit the marginalized? Let's prioritize the needs of the marginalized. Because the web is for all people. So internationalization, I mentioned it before, it's kind of important from a perspective of how the web is used by people from all cultures. Low bandwidth networks is another example of how can we build new technologies so that they make so that they are so that they work better, so that they don't assume that everybody has an extremely high bandwidth 4G, 5G now, Wi-Fi connection. Even when I travel around the UK, when I was still traveling around the UK, it's very easy to find yourself in a dead zone or a place that has very low bandwidth. So this is not only a problem in the developing world, it's also a problem anywhere in the world, really. And we also need to make sure that we understand that people often don't have the latest handsets or devices. So we need to make sure that these technologies are developed for those lower spec devices as well. The web must enable freedom of expression, but we also need to understand that that should not contravene other human rights. And freedom of expression should not be understood to mean that free speech everywhere. That we should understand that commercial platforms have a right to remove content if it's harassment, if it's hate speech, etc. So we try and like draw a line here where we say, look, the web must enable freedom of expression, but that doesn't mean that that we must be freedom of speech purists in order to in order to build stuff on the web. Web must make it possible to trace information that we see, to verify the credibility of information. So an example of that is being able to install extensions in your web browser that pop up a warning if you visit a website or if you see information in search results that is coming from an untrustworthy source. Being able to expose that kind of information on the web is extremely important. And we must enhance individuals' control and power. So, good examples of bad actions that are happening on the web all the time are the installation of stalkerware, for instance, or connected devices that are used by abusive partners to surveil their partners, or just routine surveillance that we all are putting up with all the time with regard to trackers and privacy invasive technologies. So we must be building a web that's a little bit more naturally resistant to those things. The web must be a sustainable platform as well, and that's something that we have a lot of work to do because the web is not extremely sustainable right now. And transparent, I mentioned transparency as being a core kind of feature of the web. That also enables people to learn, it enables web developers to learn, it enables research and audit, and it enables extensions to be installed, which can be a kind of key element of how people view the web or control how they view the web. The web is multi-browser inherently, and multi-OS and multi-device. So that means that you choose which browser you want, and you can choose that browser based on functions or features or whether or not it's privacy enabling, and that again helps people helps the web to remain honest, and helps people to choose how to render web content the way they want to. So being able to install ad blockers, being able to install color correctors for accessibility reasons, website annotations, and for accessibility needs. So how to apply this in real life? And I kind of tried to summarize kind of how to think about this if you're not working on web technologies, if you're not working on websites themselves. How do you apply this in real life? How can you enjoy or put pressure on the web to be more honest and to be more of an ethical platform as you go about your daily lives? So first of all, choose web, right? Very often you see applications such as Twitter, Facebook, whoever, Instagram, will have an app, and then you're also able to use it via the web. So if you use one of those services via the web, then you're putting a browser maker as an intermediary between you and that service. So that means that you have more of a chance of there's more of a chance of that browser, especially if it's a privacy enabling browser, safeguarding your privacy. The web inherently safeguards your privacy better than native applications. So choosing the web helps you to experience those services in a safer way. If you've ever seen a pop-up like this, Twitter is better on the app. Ask why. Why is it better on the app? Is it better for you? Actually, probably not. It's better for Twitter because they get more access to your data. And that's why they want to push their app on you. So I'm not attacking Twitter. Everybody does this. And I think, as a user of these services, think of if you're using the web version and you see a pop-up like this, think twice before saying switch to the app. I would urge you to tap not now. Choose a web browser that has your back. So a little bit of shameless self-promotion here. I put Samsung Internet on the list. We happen to have very strong privacy protections. Firefox has great privacy protections as well. They're really, again, very ethically motivated. Brave is another web browser that you may not have heard of that has fantastic privacy protections. If you're using a Mac or an iOS device using Safari, their latest version of Safari is bundling very good privacy protections as well. So I really urge you to take a look at choose a browser that kind of like matches your thinking. Try alternative search engines. This is another thing that I really encourage people to do. Take a look at DuckDuckGo. Take a look at Quant. Both of these search engines are have privacy and have a more ethical approach at their root than the kind of more commercial alternatives. I would say they're both commercial companies, I should say, but they are thinking about how to build a great search engine and build a great company and still respect user privacy and respect user agency. Install privacy preserving extensions. If you, I do recommend, I always recommend installing something called Privacy Badger, which is from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which does protect user privacy when you're using the web. This is mostly applicable on desktop browsers. I also recommend installing the DuckDuckGo extension. I usually use those as well. And I tend to use DuckDuckGo as my search engine. And if you ever are in a conversation where somebody says, we need an app, I would suggest asking why. Why do we need an app? Why can't we do this with web? Finally, support organizations that are working to support a more ethical web. So I mentioned W3C. W3C doesn't really need your support. They're an industrial consortium that and they don't kind of have a mechanism of support from individuals, but organizations like the World Wide Web Foundation and the Electronic Frontier Foundation are doing an awful lot of work to keep the web honest and to keep the web delivering on its promise for all people. So I really encourage you to take a look at them and support those organizations where possible. So that's it from me. I hope people enjoyed it. I'm certainly happy to take Q&A at this time and delve in further into any of the things that I talked about: ethical web, the role of web standards, the role of the browser, what it's like to move internationally. Anything you want to talk about, I'm happy to discuss.
Great. Dan, thank you. That was a great talk. Appreciate the discussion on a very timely topic. This program is actually part of the category that we cover. We cover a lot of categories in our Sunday programs. This is related to ethics. A pretty timely discussion. We will have a Q&A in a little bit, and we can get to some of the questions. At this time, we will play a brief musical interlude. During that time, we'll also show photos of our community. When we were together, hopefully we'll get there very soon. Also, to support talks like this and to support the EHS, as well as to sponsor the Sunday programs, we would appreciate a donation. You can actually donate either through Zelle or through PayPal. You can actually go to ethicalhumanistsociety.org/donate, or you can look up EHS under Zelle. We suggest a donation of about $5. Please give whatever you can. It'll be greatly appreciated. So at this time, we'll take a brief pause for the musical interlude, and we'll back with some time for the Q&A. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. So let's take some time for Q&A. Raise your hand if you have any questions. Sorry, I was just kidding. As you know, you can enter the questions in the comment section. We will filter them and go through and try to get to as many questions as we can. Make sure that the questions are questions. As somebody said, a question ends with a question mark. Make sure there is one. So with that said, let us get started. Dan, again, thank you. It's been great talk. I do want to start off by asking a simple question.
Sure.
Is that the model of the space station behind you?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay.
actually a Lego space station. I like it. I like it. I like to use it well. When this whole thing started, and I started doing an awful lot more streaming, as opposed to going out and speaking at physical events, I realized that I needed some more visual interest in my background. So I immediately
Absolutely. I
thought,
think
yeah, yeah,
that's better than the green rooms that we most commonly see nowadays on this. So great background.
yeah.
So let me get started with the first question. Can you tell us about the infrastructure that transmits the waves and how it's paid for? So I'm assuming they're referring to what is the backbone of the internet look like that's
Yeah.
transmitting all of these signals, the video, the audio, the
So I
slides
mean
that you were sharing.
the answer to that question is very complex. It's every I mean there it is kind of all wrapped up in what is the internet rather than what is the web. So it's the underlying, as I was saying, the web is a technology platform that's built on top of the internet, and the internet is more like the wiring, and the more like, for instance, the cables of cable TV, and whereas the web is the TVs and the television channels. The So it's different depending on what kind of technology you're talking about. I mean, if you're using mobile tech, mobile phones that are connected over 5G or 4G, then it's whatever your wireless carrier or mobile operator is using, and they're charging you. They're charging for access. They're charging for bytes, or you're charging you a monthly flat fee. And that's how things are. So, the nature of kind of the internet is that you pay separately for internet access than you do for, say, choosing your a pay for service, for instance, like Netflix, that might send you information over that service. So it's that I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. The next question, can you say more on principles for discerning bias? The questionnaire notes that most universities and media companies are disproportionately populated with liberals, in quotes. So who decides how much dissent is allowed?
I think that one of the answers to this question is what are the codes of conduct by which we operate these discussions? So, and W3C in particular this year published a new code of conduct, which is not about the technologies themselves. I've been talking about kind of the ethical principles behind the technology and the design, but the principles behind the discussion and how those discussions happen and how they're moderated, and what constitutes open discussion versus abuse, for instance. And I think more and more technology organizations and universities are understanding that they need to put in place modern codes of conduct in order to enable those kinds of discussions to happen. And to enable people to feel that they can express an opinion without being abused or without having negative consequence. Hope that
Thank you. The next question, is there a new version of the web in the works, perhaps just for academia or other groups?
Well, um, a lot of people claim ever since kind of the beginning of the web, people have been claiming, I've got a new version of the web and it solves all the problems that the old version has, and it's going to replace this old version of the web. And I don't think that is a real thing. I think the web continues to evolve. That's the web that I see happening. And certainly, I think this is true in academia as well, where more and more, as more and more people use the web for more applications, um, they, uh, you know, their use of the web evolves. Web browsers evolve. The web application deployment mechanisms evolve. So the whole thing is an evolving platform, and I don't think it's meaningful anyway anymore to talk about Web X.0, Web 2.0, Web 3.0. Everybody, ever since Tim O'Reilly coined the term Web 2.0, people have been trying to say, well, what's Web 3.0? What's Web 4.0? And it's meaningless, frankly. We're in the web is an evolving platform. So I don't actually think we will see something come in that eclipses the entire web. I think we're going to see it continue to evolve. At least that's certainly what I hope.
Great. So it means like it's essentially evolving continuously rather than discretely,
It's a
like
living
unlike say an
platform.
iPhone.
It's a living platform, right? As new technologies are developed and are kind of incorporated into the web, new standards, those that new code is rolled out to everybody. The idea of an evergreen browser, for instance, is something that is intrinsically important to how the web operates. When a new technology is is developed and incorporated into the web, um, you want to make sure that all web browsers that are out there on people's computers and devices can use that new technology, new layout mechanism, for instance, because web developers want to be able to use that new mechanism. So modern web browsers all auto update, and keeping those up to date is extremely important, both from a perspective of how you get new features and also how you mitigate against security and privacy issues that crop up.
Thank you. The next question, they did label this a basic question. Can you explain the difference between using Firefox for a browser versus using DuckDuckGo as a search engine? I thought they were the same thing.
Right. So I mean, it's not a dumb question at all because it is inherently, the internet and the web are inherently confusing. You're not buying one particular thing when you use the internet. I mean, back before we had the internet, back before the dawn of the web, um, people use services like AOL and CompuServe, where you pay one fee, you dial up, you connect to that service. Everything you see is controlled by AOL or CompuServe or whatever the service was. When you search, you're searching using AOL. When you're reading content, you're reading content that is delivered to you via, even if it's from the New York Times, it's delivered to you via AOL in an AOL-based service. So that what and that kind of like mode of engaging with digital services was something that people took for granted back then. The idea of the web and the openness of the web threw that out, but with it came added complexity. So now, and since the development of the web and the popularization of the internet, you pay for internet service, then you choose what browser you want to use, and on top of that, you can also choose which search engine and which other types of services you want to use in order to access websites or to search for websites. So um, you might have Mac Macintosh computer, you download and install um, Firefox, and then within Firefox, you can choose which, either just by typing in DuckDuckGo or typing in Google or typing in Quant, you can choose which search engine you want to go to search the web. But then you can also choose which default search engine you're using within any browser. Any browser, modern ones, allow you to choose a default search engine, and that's important too because usually most people do most of their web searching using the default browser, the default search that is set within their browser. And so choosing to choose or being able to choose a different default is an important aspect of how we use the web, and that's where choosing something like DuckDuckGo can come into play.
Moving on to the next question, as corporations, governments, and other actors improve web behavior along the lines that you outlined, seems like there are some bad actors who are moving to the dark web and carry on there. What does that actually mean, and how should I think about that as a personal and social issue?
Couple, I'm not, I'm not sure that I agree that bad actors are necessarily moving to the dark web. I mean, it depends on what you mean by the dark web. I think that bad actors are trying, the bad actors that I usually think about when I think about bad actors on the web are people that are trying to hijack your experience. They're trying to um, inter, to trick you, to fish you, for instance, by pretending to be your bank, or they're trying to trick you into downloading malware and installing that. And there's an awful lot of that, particularly in the advertising world, where malicious advertisements um, try to trick you into agreeing to permissions, for instance. I think that that's the role of web browsers and web standards, is to make it more difficult for those bad actors to behave in that way. Um,
Probably
but
referring to,
there will always be bad actors on the web, and I think that yeah, it will it's part, it's inherent in the openness of the platform.
yeah, I
Um,
think probably the question maybe was referring to, you did define the way you think about bad actors is people who are trying to fish or hack, right,
right.
for your information or for your details. But is there, we sort of sometimes hear about this dark web where illegal activities can happen, right? I mean, it could be a black market for drugs that are banned or things that are not legal.
Yeah.
Is there, I think the questionnaire was referring to that as the dark web.
I think that the dark web, because those kinds of activities are part of the human experience, and the web
Hmm.
is uh, it, web mirrors that experience, right? So those activities will happen on the web, whether it's a dark web or what have you. I think that it is. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to know how to deal with it. Other than that, other than the fact that web browsers themselves can kind of steer you away from that, or can warn you if you're about to go to a website that looks malicious or looks like it may be dodgy in some way.
Okay,
Um,
great. The next question talks about YubiKeys. They're asking, do they improve privacy on the web in a way that is practical? Or is there something else that we can do so that we can actually share personal information on the web, like, for commerce or communication, etc.?
I think YubiKeys, which are a kind of a USB or Bluetooth connected dongle that contains some cryptographic information, are becoming more and more important with regard to how people access online services. Right now, the services that are access those services securely and in a securely and in a private way. Right now, a lot of services that are aimed at developers are using these. So you have things like GitHub, for instance, that use them quite well. There are new web standards that are being deployed right now, such as the Web Authentication API, which should make them even more mainstream. And they are an important way in which you can introduce a second factor of authentication, a very secure second factor. I would say the more kind of mainstream way to do two-factor authentication is using a two-factor authentication app, such as Google Authenticator, or there are a number of different two-factor authentication applications. I really suggest taking a look at those before you think about using YubiKey, because they're a lot easier to use and they provide enough security that you can avoid people kind of like hijacking your Twitter account because they guessed your password, for instance. So I think that right now is more the mainstream of how people are doing two-factor authentication.
Thank you. Interesting next question. The questioner has a secret desire to have a second, less anonymous web. Can you help me convince me I'm wrong to want an alternate, non-commercial space without anonymity to improve discourse and eliminate trolling?
So I think that the question of whether or not anonymity is good or bad for social media is a very interesting one, and I'm certainly not an expert. I would say that very often people say, well, this problem with trolls on the internet would be completely cleared up if everybody just had to prove who they were using a government issued identification, and then they wouldn't say all these horrible things. The problem is that only works for privileged people. So if you live in a society where being LGBT is illegal, and you could face the death, imprisonment or even being killed because of that, then clearly that's not a place where you want to be always identifying yourself using government supplied identity. Also, the way that we think about identity on the internet needs to be global. It needs to cross boundaries, cross borders. So it's a very complex question. In general, I think I don't support the idea. I think that having I think having less anonymity on the web probably is more harmful than not.
Great, thank you. The next question is about net neutrality. Can you tell us about net neutrality? We heard about this especially in the US, during the Obama administration, and then the Trump administration essentially had different viewpoint, and the FCC had made some changes. Tell us about what net neutrality is, and with the change that happened in the US, what is the net result of that?
I'm not really an expert in the U.S. regulation stuff. I will say that, I mean, net neutrality is the basic idea that it isn't. I mentioned how you pay separately, or with internet applications, who you choose to be your internet provider is different from who you choose to say be your streaming media provider, right? Like, so I could choose, in my case, BT, British Telecom, to be my internet provider. And I want to, and they have a television offering, but I'm not interested in their television offering. I want Netflix, or I want to use BritBox as my television offering, as my streaming platform. So I think one of the ideas behind the push for net neutrality is to try and make sure that big companies that offer access don't favor their own services over the services of third parties, or even more worryingly, block or throttle the services of third parties versus their own services, because that is anti-competitive behavior and goes against the kind of like open access ethos of the web and of the internet. So yeah, as far as the U.S. Regulation goes, though, I'm not totally up to speed on it. I'm sorry.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on, have you seen the film, The Social Dilemma? I think it was released in the US Netflix. Maybe it's there in the UK as well.
I haven't seen it. It is there. I haven't seen it. I have kind of yes. I haven't seen it, so I can't really speak to it. I'm sorry. I mean, I definitely am aware of the issues that it is, that I think it's about, and the fact that we have, again, I mentioned filter bubbles is one of the kind of like risks that we have right now. Also, how social networks are used to manipulate public opinion, at scale. I think we saw a lot of that with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which certainly got a lot of play here. Um, but I think that those are we society needs to come to grips with that kind of stuff. But yeah, I am no, I know I need to watch it. It's on my list.
Thank you. We let's do two more questions and then we will wrap it up.
Sure.
Can you recommend a security service like McAfee?
I wouldn't want to. It's not my area. I wouldn't want to recommend it. I mean, I think it really depends on your platform too. The answer is different depending on if you're on Mac, if you're on PC, if you're on Windows, if you're on Android, if you're on iOS. So it's yeah. I'm sorry.
Totally understand. It's funny thing. I think it was recently that John McAfee was arrested somewhere as a long story. And it's funny that his namesake, he started the company and it's doing security on the web. Different
Yeah.
topic.
No
Just wanted
comment. Yeah.
to. Final question. If you could change one thing about the early decisions of the web, what would you change?
I think Tim Berners-Lee is on record as saying why that he would have had one slash instead of two slashes, because with the HTTP colon slash slash. Um, if I could change one thing about the early decisions of the web, I think if we had built encryption into the web early on, and really understood that it needed to be end-to-end encrypted, and then that end-to-end encryption was really important, we probably would have been in a better position than we are now. It was so difficult. Having been a web technologist building websites in the mid 90s, it was not clear at all that what the dangers were of these all of this stuff uh, going over the wire unencrypted and unsecure. I think the other thing that really was an that ended up in a lot of unintended negative consequences was the development of cookies. Cookies were, which get discussed a lot when we talk about web platform, were really a mechanism to provide for session IDs and personalization, and have been used mostly to develop an ad ecosystem that enables people to be tracked and enables third-party tracking. And there's a mess right now around cookies that we're still cleaning up. So I think that again, how cookies were originally developed, probably that with the benefit of hindsight, we could have done better.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate the talk as well as your patience in answering a lot of these questions.
Sure, absolutely.
Great having you on, Dan. That concludes the talk. I do want to read you a small quote. I found this very interesting. The quote is from somebody called David Morris. I didn't hear, the first time I heard about this quote was when President Obama referred to it. The quote is as follows: "The problem really is that while humanity continues to experience huge leaps in technology, we do not experience equivalent leaps in our ethical capacity. in the never-ending arms race between technology and ethics, tech always wins. That's the quote. I do not agree there, but that's what the quote says. Researchers who tally the results of this immortal race have a name for it: history. A little cynical quote, but hopefully we will have instances where technology wins. Thank you again for all of you for joining our talk, and thank you, Dan, for the great speech, and also a lot of the backroom staff who made this happen, as well as Sharon, who nominated the speaker. Thanks, and have a great day. For some of you who would like to join Coffee Hour, feel free to sign up, and we'll see you there. Thank you.